I'm Kamil, and I'm here to talk about models, about custom modality for iOS. I'm a user experience designer at 10 Clouds. 10 Clouds is a software house, which means that I have an opportunity to work closely with developers. This gives me a lot of insight into the collaboration between design and development about possible problems in communication and basic expectations. And this talk is actually a result of one of those observations. It all started with a question. A friend of mine, an iOS developer, came up to me with a custom model that was prepared for him by a designer. The thing was, it was basically an action sheet, but it was at the center of the screen. So the question was, is that necessary? What's the reason behind that? And I couldn't find any other than aesthetics. So at this point, I realized that we might be onto something. It turns out that the number of custom models or possible options concerning modality, there are so many options that Apple's human interface guidelines doesn't cut it anymore, that we might need something additional. So I decided to go through all the custom patterns, some popular patterns used in a lot of apps, and I tried to make some sense out of it. Tried to build some framework that would help us decide to make more informed decisions depending which type of view should we use. But before we dive into it, I thought that it's worth recapping what's so great about models and why are they useful in our applications. So the cool thing about models is that they require full uninterrupted attention, because the rest of the application is either hidden entirely or dimmed. It's inaccessible for the users, so they have to complete the task. The task is another thing that's crucial in models. They are always task-based. Once the task is complete, model can be dismissed. So they have this clear beginning and an end. And the third thing is models make our app appear much easier to use, much smaller, because people consider modal a black box. Basically, this is something you're taken to do some particular thing, and then you're back in the main app. So they don't consider it a part of the main navigation flow. So by using modal, we make actually our application smaller and easier to comprehend by users. But modals can take up the whole screen, only a part of it. They can be centered or fixed to one of the sides of the screen. Models can pop up, they can slide from the side. So no wonder this is confusing. We have so many possibilities out there that it's really hard to make the right call. So I'm often faced with that decision, and I came up with this simple rule of thumb. We have to answer the question, does it do things or list things we can do in the app? And with that distinction, I was able to group models into pickers and doers, what I call them. So what is a picker? So picker requires a decision before we can move on. So basically, it can be an alert, it can be a popover, or an action sheet. And notice that none of those takes up the whole screen. The thing is that pickers are really fast to use. You make a decision, you act on it, and then you're right back on the main flow. So design communicates that, because since you see the rest of the app in the background that's dimmed, then it means that you'll be right back on it. So the design actually shows you the amount of attention that is required here. The most common the most common picker is an action sheet. And I have two custom examples here. One is from Apple Music, which uses some additional graphics. And on the right side, we have an example from Dropbox that uses additional icons to make it easier to make a decision for users. And Action Sheet is great for listing things. However, it's hard to add some additional graphic, and there's not much space for it anyway in there. So if you have a lot of graphics you need to show the user, then I would recommend some alternatives. And one of those alternatives could be popover. So it's great for listing stuff, and the layout here can be more easily customized, so we can add a lot more content. It scales better in size. And it has one more distinction, namely that little arrow we see at the bottom. So this arrow is great for communicating context. So if you have something that affects the rest of the screen or some particular element, then using popover shows that very clearly, that people will know what their decision will affect in the app, what will change after they make it. And the third part of Picker is an alert. We use alerts when we have a question we want to ask the user. We can also gather some feedback from him or ask for permission. And we also can add some additional graphics here, but we have to keep in mind that if we overdo it, then we actually obscure the message. It's actually, as you can see on those examples, it's a bit harder to know what they're asking you. So it's great to when you need to ask a question, and it's great for permissions. And however, if you have more than 2 options to show in an alert, then it's better to go with action sheet because it scales better that way. The second part are the second type of models I call doers, and they are for getting stuff done. They're great for adding, editing, any complex task, basically. And the first type of doer is part screen model. So sometimes we have features that rely on context. I have 2 examples here. On the left, we have a note-taking app, Burr, which shows you the context of a note in the background, and on top of it, we see some additional information, some details about the note. At the bottom of the screen, we have export buttons, and through that design, we know that when we hit that TXT button, we are actually sharing that one particular note. If this was a full screen model, people might be wondering whether they would be able to add some additional notes later on, or is that it? And this might cause some friction and maybe some slight frustration. So by showing that note in the background, we are actually communicating what will be affected, what will happen when we do that. On the right side, we have an example from ScanBot, and it's pretty much the same case. We see the scan in the background, we know it's there, and in front of it, we see some customized model that allows us to either pick a service or edit, add a custom one. There are 3 things to keep in mind when we decide to go with part screen views. The first one is positioning. In most cases, position is determined by the amount of content we want to show without scrolling. However, sometimes it affects some particular area of the screen. So let's say if we have, for example, account switcher at the top of the application, when we show a model with possible accounts we can switch to, it's better if we show it nearby so people instantly know that this is what this feature relates to. So it's better to show it in this specific area then. The second thing is animation. Models shouldn't appear as a surprise for a user. They should be predictable, and animation does that well. And proper use of animation actually tells users where they are in this physical structure of the app. Is this view next to the previous one I saw, or is it in front of it? It makes people feel less confused by what's actually going on in the system. And the third thing that's easy to miss is closing gesture. When people see animation, then instantly try to dismiss a view by reversing that animation. So if something zooms in, people instantly try to pinch it out to close it. And the same goes for swiping. If something slides from the side, they try to flick it back. So adding this gesture control actually makes the app feel more natural and people feel more in control. If you use 3D Touch in your application, it might not be a good idea to center your models because it's easily confused with a PIX view. And if that's your case, I would recommend reconsider some design decisions like rounded corners, for example, to make it more distinct, to avoid confusion. There is last thing about part screen models, and this one's tricky. So sometimes the feature relates to a specific element of the interface from the previous flow. So popover applies here as well. So it can be used both for listing things or for heavy tasks. The second type of doer is full screen model, definitely the most common one. And it's for heavy tasks that can have multiple steps. It's great for that because it takes the whole screen, so it requires full attention. There's nothing else you can see here. And also it has the most space for content we want to show as well. And it's generally agreed that positive action is always on the right side of the navigation bar. So for those full screen models, we have to remember that actions like done, close, or save should be on the right, while destructive actions like cancel should be always on the left side. And this actually started to apply to all kinds of models. Here we have an example from Apple Maps, where we have a close icon on the right side. So by that design, we instantly know that if we change something here, like something on that segmented control, for example, when we hit close, it won't be lost. And what about navigation controller? So sometimes a feature can be done both in a navigation controller or a model view. And the difference between those two is very subtle. Luckily, I was able to find some example from podcast applications. On the left, we have Overcast that decided to use navigation controller for the player. That way, the player is actually a part of the act of browsing content. You pick an episode, you pick a podcast, then you pick an episode, and inside of that episode details, we see a player. However, Apple Podcasts uses full screen model that slides from the bottom of the screen. That way, we have two distinctive actions here. The first one is browsing content, and the second one is actually listening to it. So by that design, Overcast puts content first. Like you think about this app in terms of content, its structure, and its hierarchy. You basically browse the content to listen to it. So you're more likely to open Overcast if you want to listen to a specific podcast, for example. However, Apple Podcasts is more about building your playlist and listening to those episodes. So you might not think in terms of the full podcast, but in terms of particular episodes, because playback is actually a different task, which is a result of browsing content. So to put it simply, navigation controllers promote content and its hierarchy, and models are all about the task. So to sum up, models are a very effective tool. It might be hard to get it right at first, but when you do, you realize that it makes app much faster and easier to use for people. First, you have to figure out if it's supposed to do things or list things to do. Then you have to consider showing the rest of the app in the background for context, if that's necessary for your problem. And thirdly, you have to mind the details, like positioning, closing gesture, and animation. If you're still not sure, I prepared a flow diagram that I will share with you after the talk. And basically, by answering those questions, you will end up with my recommendation for your problem. So I hope this helps, and thank you for listening.
In the previous slide, I think 5 slides ago, you showed this one.
Yeah.
You showed the Overcast and the view that is shown in the view controller, like navigation view controller, and the model one, right?
Yeah.
Well, I see the appeal of the overcast approach in that you have the content and browsing the content, right?
Yeah.
But there is actually a mistake made in this app, I think. Because let's say you are opening an episode of a podcast that you want to listen to, right? So you open it and you are having a new view controller that is sliding from the right side to the left or in the center of the screen, right? You are starting to play this podcast and then you are going back to the previous screen. You don't see, you see the screen on that you have a button, play button, that is like playing the app, right? And then it disappears. So it should actually, in a logical way, stop playing the podcast, right? So yes,
Yeah,
the content is more visible, but it's not logical. And that's the reason that Apple made this a model view. Because model views are like, in this case, are like extensions of the player. That is actually a bar that is very narrow on the bottom of the screen and is always visible. So after pressing this bar, you are actually expanding this bar to the full screen, right? So I think that it's actually unfettered. I know Mark Arment is a great guy, but it's unfettered.
Yeah, and also the thing is like when you play some specific episode of the podcast and then you go back and start browsing and switch to a different one and you want to go back to the one you're actually listening to, then it like goes through the app for you, so it switches views
Yeah, of course, but
automatically.
you as a user should know that it's playing, right?
Yeah.
And you have here the controls and also the progress that is playing. And after you go back to the previous screen, it disappears. Of course, you have an indicator, but this indicator isn't actually in a like geographical sense connected to it. It's like separated.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, there is another app that makes this pattern work. It's Castro. If you see the Castro app,
I think the Castro has the model view that slides from the bottom now.
No, actually Castro has got this pattern, like pushing a new view controller in the navigation controller, but it makes the usage of the animation. It always shows the bottom bar with the controls. But after pressing and showing
that's true.
it actually changes the state of this control, right? And you can only play this podcast from this control that is always visible. So, I don't think it's a good screen for this.
Yeah, I think
because every other information you have here is actually quite good, but this is unpatterned.
well, I thought that maybe the intention was to discourage people from browsing when you start listening to. So that might be the case, but I can only guess. Right? That was my idea about this.
Which one was to discourage people from browsing?
The first one, Overcast.
Overcast?
Yeah, because it's confusing then. You know, it's hard to browse while you listen to. I think because you cannot build playlists there because if you open different episodes, then you're switching the episode that's currently playing.
I mean, from my usage of Overcast, I would completely disagree with that because I
That's
find
interesting.
that I often go back while I'm listening to a podcast. I go back and browse other ones and look at them. Obviously, I don't play them, but I look at them. So I haven't used podcasts in years, so I can't tell you
Okay.
about that one. But
Okay, so thank you.